We just need to control it and make it be the way we need it to be. But as Gandalf says, we choose madness over reason. The desire for power itself becomes too tempting and overtakes us. This embodies the villains of Tolkien's world, those who abandon the wisdom of the past because it has not worked the way they assume it should. So instead of going along with the song of creation,
because it does not work the way they think it should. So they bump up to resistance in the world. They don't like that resistance, so they want to overcome it. So they devise a machine that helps them overcome it. Thus now they've overcome that thing and free themselves. They liberate themselves from through the use of power, usually because of a machine or magic. And they liberate themselves so that they can live into who they want to be. But the problem is, what that does is it doesn't just overpower the world, but it does something to you. In overcoming the natural limitations of the way the world's been created, you have bent the world, but you've also bent yourself. And by consistently bending the world and yourself, that's why you end up going from an elf to an orc, a man to a goblin, an ent to a troll, a hobbit to Gollum. Really, really profound, I think. I'll let him continue.
waiting for divine providence to triumph over evil and imperfection, they attempt to seize power and do it themselves, which ultimately consumes them. This is very much the mentality of the main villain, Sauron. Scholars have noted Sauron embodies the modernist philosophy of Nietzsche, the rejection of traditional religion and the will to power. For those who do not know, Friedrich Nietzsche believed that a new era had arisen, one in which we no longer believed in God and where we could no longer derive morality from God. This led to moral and existential nihilism, in which there is no objective good and evil and no objective purpose for our lives. Out of this, Nietzsche says we all must rise up to...
Okay. Moral and existential nihilism. There's no objective moral framework in which we live. Existential, there's no purpose, there's no telos. And that's one of the big things for Tolkien, right? Is each person, each thing has a telos, an end, a purpose, a goal, something that they should be striving towards. And so in rejecting a teleology, a purposefulness in creation, you end up with a lack of meaning. And that's where Nietzsche kind of takes off.
Moral and existential nihilism, in which there is no objective good and evil and no objective purpose for our lives. Out of this, Nietzsche says we all must rise up to become an Übermensch, which is defined as a superior man who could rise above traditional Christian ethics to create and impose their own values and purpose.
Again, rising up, overpowering, creating something of our own instead of living into the order that has been created. And this is because Nietzsche, Sauron, don't think that there is a natural order, a way of things being created. And so they have to impose their own order on the world. Or they don't think that the limits that we've been given are good. And so they want to overcome those limits to then produce something in their own image.
According to Nietzsche, we can no longer pretend to rely on God. We must become gods in his place.
We must become gods in his place. Here, I'll mute this and keep going. We must become gods in his place. So, in order to have this ascension, we have to, in some sense, accumulate power unto ourselves. And that accumulation, like I was talking about earlier, then, in Tolkien's imagination, causes a distortion. It warps us in a certain way, which is why we end up producing evils, because it ripples down into further consequences. You distort the world in one way, then in order to stay on top, you have to continue distorting the world in more ways, and it just dominoes from there.
We have killed him in his place. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods, simply to appear worthy of it? For Nietzsche, this was liberating and a glorious realization. Now, each man could derive their own laws, desires, and joys. Each individual could make his or her own purpose in their own roles. But for Tolkien, this was a nightmare. Tolkien said the conflict of the Lord of the Rings is about God and his sole right to divine honor. Sauron desired to be a god king and was held to be one by his servants. Although Tolkien is not directly responding to Nietzsche, he has indirectly crafted Sauron as an Übermensch figure, an entity that rejects his place in the song of creation and attempts to rise up and turn himself into a god king. Sauron forges his own purpose, one in which power is central, and all around him must bend to his will and plan. He is described as one who wants to dominate all life, bend it to his design and purpose. Nietzsche said goodness was everything that heightened the feeling of power, and badness was everything born of weakness. But for Nietzsche, this didn't necessarily mean you would become something like Sauron or a cruel dictator. Instead, for Nietzsche, self-realization and expression in the arts was a better path towards power.
So, real quick, so for a lot of things going on there. Again, I've been talking about ascension, take power, use it, wield it, create the world in your image, all things that he's just talking about. Goodness and badness being redefined. Goodness, for Nietzsche, is everything that heightens feelings of power, the expressions of power. Badness is everything that is born of weakness. And so there's this real sense in which we see moral reconstruction going on. And I think this will push us a little bit into this obsession with the realistic, the gritty, that we get when it comes to a turn towards something like Game of Thrones. One of the things that Mike Jones is about to talk about, beauty being the antidote. And I think this is an under-realized aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy. One of the reasons why I think beauty is now on the rise, an obsession with some kind of beauty, particularly with the traditional. That I don't think Nietzsche would have seen coming. But beauty, if goodness, truth, and beauty are all the same, the transcendentals is called within the Christian tradition, and they all reflect God, then we as Christians can use beauty to demonstrate truth and goodness. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Luke and I spend a lot of time thinking about art, particularly narrative, and its beauty, is because it has a particular way of speaking to us. And I think that's one of the reasons why this juxtaposition of Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings is so important and so helpful, is because it demonstrates to us two things that have captured culture's attention really well. And I think it's partially because of what Nietzsche describes here and what Mike is going to help us think through.
Being kind and helping others was a better way to gain power, because others would be indebted to you, and you would have more power, and that you had more people willing to help and aid you. But Tolkien saw this philosophy as one that would slowly corrupt. One may start out as good, but slowly the will to power and dominating others would turn you into a dark lord. Sauron embodies this, an angelic-like being who started off as someone who desired to order the world for the better, but is later consumed by his lust for power.
That's an under-realized aspect of Sauron's origin. He wasn't just someone who wanted to conquer things. He was someone who saw pain and suffering in the world and thought, I can do something about that. I can control it. I'm going to use power to control it. And when he aimed at that, he ended up hitting creation of a lot of suffering and the distortion of whole peoples. That's what Tolkien thinks this does.
Desiring power starts off as a means for something better, but the craving of more power eventually consumes you until it's all you care for. Whereas Nietzsche saw the will to power as a good thing, Tolkien rejected it and taught it would lead to a consuming desire to dominate all others for the sake of power itself. In The Lord of the Rings, the good guys stand against Sauron by rejecting the will to power, embodied in the rejection of the temptation of the One Ring. Peter Kreeft says, "The ring is not a means to any further end. It is Nietzsche's will to power as itself the end." The characters win by rejecting the will to power, and instead choose to act through love and accept their place in creation.
And that right there is the point. The ring embodies not power or a mechanism of power, but the will to power, the desire to have more power. Because again, once you've overcome something, you're going to need to overcome more things in order to maintain the status quo that you've created, or to keep pushing it forward. And so power has this seductive nature inherent within it, which is why the ring is constantly pulling at people, because it gives them power that they can use, but it takes from them at the same time. And so Tolkien's heroes, Frodo climbing up Mount Doom, burned and scorned and feeling beaten, Aragorn driving his army to the Black Gate, not to conquer, but to sacrifice. Those are the things that win the day for Tolkien. Those are the things that win the day.